Good evening, everybody. It's good to have you here. Hope this finds everybody well. Today we start a new study on Esther, and I am using Max Lucado's book, You Were Made for This Moment. And he says it is courage for today and hope for tomorrow. And I believe it is. I believe we all need that. And so anyway, I recommend that you read this, just like I recommended that you read Deborah's Company. So we will start tonight by talking about Esther. And this study is intended to help you see how God is working behind the scenes and to give you insight into God's character. Please be listening to what God is saying about your circumstances, how He is moving in your midst. You may be in a situation where you feel like that He's forgotten all about you and that He's not even with you. But I guarantee you that He is moving behind the scenes and He's going to work it all out. So be willing and ready to step into the spotlight when He calls you to act. Just like Deborah. Deborah was a housewife. She probably did the mundane things that we do every day. You know, I always think of Joyce Meyer when she says, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. We get up, we do the same thing. We make our bed, we brush our teeth, and, you know, we wash the clothes, we take care of everybody, and we just feel like life is just a drudgery sometimes. But God has a plan, and God has He has a challenge for you. He has something for you to do. And you just listen to Him and follow Him, and one day He will show you what it is when He calls you to act. This book of Esther is in the Bible. It's in the Old Testament. It's between Nehemiah and Job. And I find it interesting that it, along with the Song of Solomon, are the only two books of the Bible that the word God is never mentioned. You never hear God mentioned. And I just think that's so interesting because it shows how He is working behind the scenes, even though they don't talk about Him and we don't hear about Him. But He is working behind the scenes. And He is setting the whole thing up to bring freedom for the Jews. His purpose shows up. It starts off with evil, and it ends up with good overcoming evil. Which, if we look back over our lives, I'm sure that we have all been through times that we can now call evil, but we made it through it, and it ended up in good. It ended up with good things. And that's God's intervention. It's miraculous when He intervenes. That's why some people are in situations where all we can say is, you know, we can't interfere. We just have to pray. Because God's the one that does the miraculous. And God's the one that can take the person that we think is a loser and never going to make it, and God's the one that can raise that person up if we just stay out of the way and pray. So I want you to pay attention to this story because I just want you to see how it opens up and how it ends and how God just was all the time. He was there, even though His name was never mentioned. The book of Esther has 3 parts. The first part is confusion, and that is because the people have chosen the glamour of Persia, which is now Iran, over the goodness of God. Persia was a very, it was a rich country. It had a lot of agriculture, a lot of good farmland, and it had a lot of minerals, and so they were making a good life. And the Jews at that time had been exiled from Israel, and they were scattered all over the world. And a lot of them had settled in Susa, which was the capital of Persia, and it was a very rich area. And they chose to go over to the other side and live as if they were Persians. And the Persians, I tried to find out exactly what their religion was. They didn't believe in Yahweh. They had a god, but his name was not Yahweh. And some of them believed in lots of gods. So and they believed, you do good and you think good thoughts and you be good and everything's okie dokie. So what the Jews showed is that they were willing to compromise over their conviction, and we've talked about that before. That if you are a Christian trying to live the life that God wants you to live, you cannot compromise. It only takes one time to make a compromise against the Word of God, and it can ruin your entire life. So they were compromising. Therefore, confusion set in. And guess who's the author of confusion? The devil. And so he had pretty much taken their lives over, and they were, they thought they were living the good life because they were rich and they were making money and they had rich farmland and they were doing pretty well. And so when they were allowed to go back to Israel, they chose to stay in Persia because they liked the way that they were living. And Max Lucado says that Persia was lying to them. And I wanted to read to you a few excerpts from the book that he writes. The Jews who remained in Persia chose to remain in Persia. Exile had been kind to them. They had good jobs, secure positions. Some were more Persian than they were Hebrew. To enjoy the success and wealth of the people in Susa, all they had to do was play their cards right, abide by the rules, and fade into the fabric of the culture. And when I read that, I thought, doesn't that sound familiar? Sounds familiar to me. As Christians, we're supposed to stand out. If people don't know that you're a Christian and that you believe in Jesus, then you're doing something wrong. Because everybody should know that you carry the light of the world. There should be something different about you that makes you different than the world. And there are a lot of Christians, I believe, including people that are in the church, that people don't know it. And they just blend in with the rest of the world. And that's why we're in such chaos and confusion now. I believe. He didn't write that, I did. So then he goes on to say that the point of the first chapter of Esther is simply this: Persia is lying to you. And I believe that our country, if you want to compare it to Persia, is lying to us. Do we need the same reminder? The assignment given to the Jews has been passed on to us. God displays his glory and goodness through the church. As we worship God, love our neighbors, and cherish our families, we become billboards of God's message. But sometimes we forget our calling. We need this reminder. Persia is lying to us. I don't mean to be blunt, but then again, I do. Billion-dollar industries are conning you by luring you into lifestyles that will leave you wounded and weary. Examples: try this one. Pornography is a harmless expression of sexuality. Really? It is as addictive as drugs and alcohol. It changes the makeup of the brain. What about the sex trafficking it encourages, the violence it engenders? Yet the message that porn peddlers whisper to the unsuspecting is, it won't hurt you, it's just sex. liar. Or this: whoever dies with the most toys wins. You are what you own, so own all you can. Take on the liability, borrow the money, saddle yourself with a budget busting mortgage. It is worth it. The average American household carries more than $145,000 in debt. And this was just written 2 years ago, in, including nearly $7,000 in credit card debt. We worship stuff, hoping stuff will bring life. But your Maker, He tells you the truth. Do not lay up yourselves treasures on earth, where moth and rust destroy, but lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven. At the time of this writing, depression is on the rise. Divorce filings are up 34% year to year. Calls to mental health hotlines have increased 891%. And the suicide rate is the highest it has been at any time since World War II. 1 in 4 people ages 18 through 24 seriously considered suicide in the 30 days prior to being surveyed. How do God's people live in a godless society? Blend in and assimilate? No. This is the time to stand out and assist. We were made for this moment. So, I thought that was very profound. And there's no mistake that we are on this planet at this time when all of these horrible things are happening. And God wants us to wake up. And I'm not quite sure how He wants us to end it, but I know He wants us to pray about it and do spiritual warfare about it and let others know about it. Okay, so the first part of the book is confusion. The second part is crisis, because wherever the devil comes in, there's going to be evil. And the crisis was that all Jews were to be killed, and we'll find out more about that in the book, because of one man that hated Jews. And then the third part is conquest. It is the unimaginable. It is the providential will of God. And I love this. He said this: grand reversals are God's trademark. That is so cool, because, I mean, it looked like it was for the Jews. And then God comes in and a whole new chapter is written. And God saves the Jews, which He's famous for doing. They did that all through Deborah's time. You know, they'd live high on the hog, they'd forget about God, then they'd end up being ruled by a nasty, mean king who wanted to kill them all, and then God sent Deborah in, and they fought the war and freed the Jews, and they got to go back to their land and be free. And God has done it over and over and over again for the Jews. And He does it over and over again for us in our individual lives, I believe. So Max Lucado says that when he wrote this book, it was written during the season of winter. And the reason that he calls it that is because COVID had just hit. People were told to stay inside. People had to wear masks, which hid their smile. People lost jobs. They lost businesses. They became sick. They lost loved ones. And it was a very hard and trying and sad and evil time. And everybody was waiting for spring. And he said, I'm sure that some of you now are living in the season of winter. You've lost, look what happened in Texas. Look at all of those people that lost those precious children. There's things going on all over in everybody's life. And then there are those things that are happening that we don't know about in people's lives. Divorces, death, homelessness. It's just it's wintertime. It's barren. I think of trees in the wintertime when they have their, they've lost all their leaves, and it's barren. It can be ugly. And but he says there's a 6-letter word for encouragement, and that is Esther. Esther. So what I'm going to do is I want to read to you the book of Esther. I'm going to read it to you out of the Message Bible, which is the contemporary version of the Bible. It reads more like a story. I'm not going to read the whole story. I'm going to read like maybe 1 or 2 chapters each time, and the lesson will be about those 2 chapters or that chapter. But to me, it reads like a story, and it's almost like a soap opera. I mean, it starts off like a soap opera because of all the things that are going on, but the only difference is it ends up much different than a soap opera would end up. It ends up with God and with some heroes that we really want to be like. But before I start reading, I want to tell you the main characters in the book, in the story. The first character is King Xerxes, or Ahasuerus, and Max Lucado says it's like when you sneeze, and Ahasuerus. But it's a lot easier to say King Xerxes. Well, King Xerxes was the king of Persia. He was a wimp. He could not make any decisions by himself. He was an accomplished drinker, and he was not much of a thinker. He was pretty shallow, and he was very prideful. And you'll see how prideful he is in chapter 1, how the book of Esther begins. Then there was Queen Vashti, who was married to him, or was his queen, and she was very beautiful, because his queen would be supposedly known as the most beautiful woman in the land, and so she was very beautiful. And we find out in the story that she's also very strong-willed, and she has a lot more, I don't know, she just thinks better of herself than King Xerxes does. Then we have Haman, and he's the commander that is directly under Xerxes, and he is a villain. He's the villain. He is very evil. He cares nothing about anything but killing the Jews, and you could compare him to Hitler. And so we'll hear about Haman. And then we have Mordecai and Esther. Mordecai and Esther are cousins. Esther's mother dies in childbirth, and her father dies shortly thereafter. So Mordecai raises his cousin. They're Jewish. I believe that Mordecai is very compassionate because of the fact that he was willing to take Esther and raise her as his own. And he was very obedient to his people. He cared about the Jewish people. And he was very brave and courageous. And he knew God. And I think that he knew God a lot more than we hear about in the story of Esther. He had to have known God more than it says because of what he does. And then there's Esther, who's an orphan, and she's Jewish, and she's very brave and assertive, as we find out. And she obeyed Mordecai. She loved Mordecai, and she obeyed everything he told her to do. And she asserted her will to combat evil and promote good, because that's what Mordecai told her to do. So we will find out in the book of Esther that God never wastes a life. Each one of us has a significance and a purpose. God's solutions come through people of courage. And we all, whether you feel like it or not, we all are courageous people, or we wouldn't be sitting here listening to this, because we've all been through hard times, and here we are. So we all have courage. Whether we feel like we do or not, we do. Because we would have given up a long, long time ago if we didn't have courage. So God uses people like us. And you're just going to see how he sets this whole story up, and I believe that's what he's doing for us. So, if you don't mind, it's not very long, and I'll try to paraphrase some of it, but I just thought it would be fun to read it, and I love it. I love teaching this, and I didn't realize I did, because I mean I've studied Esther before with another teacher, and I fell in love with Esther, but this time maybe it's just a time in my life, and what's going on in the world, but it just gives me so much hope to know that we may not hear the word God, but he is with us and he is working behind the scenes. And he has got something planned for all of us, each one of us individually. So be on the lookout. Be I really would love it if you would write it down as we read this book. Write down how you see God working behind the scenes. How did he set this up? And then think of something in your life that you had no idea what was going on, and then it ended up with a miracle. And it was only because God was working behind the scenes. Excuse me. So he says in the Eugene Peterson says in the introduction that the book of Esther opens a window on this world of violence directed, whether openly or covertly, against God and God's people. And if that isn't happening today, I don't know how we could know. I mean, everything is against God and God's people. 3 characters shape the plot. Mordecai, identified simply as the Jew, anchors the story. He is solid, faithful, sane, godly. His goodness is more than matched by the evil and arrogant vanity of Haman, who masterminds the planned massacre. Mordecai's young, orphaned, and ravishing cousin Esther, whom he has raised, emerges from the shadows of the royal harem to take on the title role. And then it ends by saying, you can't eliminate God's people. No matter how many of them you kill, you can't get rid of the communities of God-honoring, God-serving, God-worshiping people scattered all over the earth. This is still the final and definitive word. So, this is the story of something that happened in the time of Xerxes, the Xerxes who ruled from India to Ethiopia, 127 provinces in all. King Xerxes ruled from his royal throne in the palace complex of Susa. In the 3rd year of his reign, I can't believe he'd only been king for 3 years, he gave a banquet for all his officials and ministers. The military brass of Persia and Media were also there, along with the princes and governors of the provinces. For 6 months, he put on exhibit the huge wealth of his empire and its stunningly beautiful royal splendors. At the conclusion of the 6 months, the king threw a week-long party for everyone living in Susa, the capital, important and unimportant. The party was in the garden courtyard of the king's summer house. The courtyard was elaborately decorated with white and blue cotton curtains tied with linen and purple cords to silver rings on marble columns. Silver and gold couches were arranged on a mosaic pavement of marble, mother of pearl, and colored stones. Drinks were served in gold chalices, each chalice one of a kind. The royal wine flowed freely, a generous king. Doesn't that sound like, you remember in the Sunday paper, how it used to have a living section, and it would have, especially if you lived in a small town, it would tell about the latest thing that happened in the town, the latest party that was thrown or something. That's what that sounds like to me. The guests could drink as much as they liked, king's orders, with waiters at their elbows to refill their drinks. Meanwhile, the queen was throwing a separate party for women inside King Xerxes' royal palace. So on the seventh day of the party, after the king had had much, 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 much wine, he decided that he was going to send his 7 eunuchs to Queen Vashti and tell her that she needed to come to him and wear her crown. Now, I've read several commentaries that said he told her to come naked. I don't know if that is true or not. Nobody's been able to prove that. But anyway, he wanted to show her off and show her beauty. So he told her to wear her crown because she was extremely good looking. But she refused to come, which I think is really brave, because I really think back then he could have had her killed because she disobeyed him and wouldn't do what she said. But instead, all the men in his council and him, oh my gosh, they got so upset because she wouldn't do what he said, and they were so afraid that all the other women in the provinces were going to go against their husbands. And he said, "The word's going to get out. Did you hear the latest about Queen Vashti? King Xerxes ordered her to be brought before him, and she wouldn't do it. When the women hear that, they'll start treating their husbands with contempt. The day the wives of the Persian and Mede officials get wind of the queen's insolence, they'll be out of control. Is that what we want? A country of angry women who don't know their place?" So anyway, so they come up with a ruling that if the king agrees to it, which of course he did because the king had no mind of his own, and he was so full of drink that, he would agree to anything. So they came up with a pronouncement that Queen Vashti would be banned from King Xerxes' presence, and then he would give a royal position to another woman who knows her place. And when the king's ruling becomes public knowledge throughout the kingdom, extensive as it is, every woman, regardless of her social position, will show proper respect to her husband. So the king and the princess loved this. So they sent bulletins to every part, out to all the 127 provinces. And it was so important to them that they understood it, that they had each bulletin for each province written in their own script, so that to make sure that they understood exactly what it said. And it said, "Every man is master of his own house. Whatever he says goes." And that's how it ends. Can you imagine? I mean, that was the most important thing going on. So that's just the beginning of the story. And so we know that Queen Vashti has been banned from the king, and the king is going to have to come up with a new queen. And that's pretty much all we know right now. So I suggest that you read the book. It's to me, it's just an awesome book. And I pray that something spoke to you tonight, and that you'll go back and see if you can see God in all of this and what God was doing. And I'll just end us in prayer. Father, I thank you so much for bringing us together. We thank you so much for your word. And we thank you, Lord, that even if your name isn't mentioned, Lord, we know that you're right there. You're right there in all of our lives. You're setting all of our lives up, Father, for good things, for just for our good. That's all I know, that no matter what has happened to us, that it's always going to end up being, things are going to come out of it that are for our good, Father. And I pray that you speak to those women right now, and men, who feel as if they have no purpose and they have no significance, and that God doesn't see them. I pray that somehow this week, Lord, that you will speak to them or at least touch them in a way that shows them that you are with them. That, that I'm sure some of them have prayed and not told anybody what they've prayed. Well, I just pray, Father, that you would personally touch them in a way that they would know that you have heard their prayer. And we just thank you that your word is true. We thank you for your love, and we thank you for teaching us, and we thank you for giving us hope for tomorrow. And I love you, Father, and we thank you for all you do for us, and we thank you most of all for your precious Son, Jesus. Amen.
Amen.
And we'll see you next week.